everyone. Great. Very excited about this presentation. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Kate Fish. I'm the Executive Director of ANCA, one of your hosts tonight. And I want to thank our co-hosts, Adirondack Foundation, the Adirondack Nonprofit Network, and the Lake Placid Center for the Arts. Everything ANCA does, whether it's working with local food, clean energy, supporting entrepreneurs, it's not possible without a really strong network of partners. So it's the events like this that kind of bring these partnerships together and make things happen. And thank you for ANCA, to ANCA members and everyone involved with ANCA for investing in growing the new economy, which is what we're going to be talking about this evening. I want to recognize a couple of special guests. Susan Merrill, who's with Senator Gillibrand's office. We are doing some important things right now. Joe Martino with Democracy at Work Institute. Rob Brown with the Cooperative Development Institute. Rob, where are you? And Carolyn Edsel Becker, Cooperative Fund for New England. She came all the way over here from New Hampshire? Massachusetts. Welcome. So, I just want to say there's a bunch of ANCA people here, and if you are on the board or on staff or a former board member, would you please stand up so everyone can see you and ask questions? And, we couldn't do any of this without all of you, so thank you. So Janine Sherline from Adirondack Foundation is to say a couple of words about the Adirondack Nonprofit Network and the foundation, and then I will introduce Anthony. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And can everyone hear me? So as Kate mentioned, my name is Janine Sherline. I'm the Director of Donor Services Development at Adirondack Foundation, which is a fancy way of saying I'm working in donor engagement. And I just happen to have loved that aspect of Adirondack Foundation, which is what drew me there about a year ago. We are so pleased to be co-hosting tonight's event with the LPCA and ANCA on behalf of ANN, the Adirondack Nonprofit Network. So ANN is exactly what it sounds like, a network for nonprofit professionals that provides opportunities for peer support, training, reflection, and so much more. This is important because nonprofits are really important to our region. Nonprofits play a vital role in maintaining and enhancing the quality of life in our communities. Nonprofits provide health care, protect valuable environmental resources, and respond to emergencies. They also entertain us, educate us, and enrich our lives. Nonprofits also tend to be lean and effective. They deploy financial and human resources to help make our communities better places to live. Nonprofit staff are local, they are insightful and compassionate community members. As an economic sector, nonprofits are a significant driver. These are highlights from an analysis of 36 Adirondack nonprofits. These couple of points illustrate that. Nonprofits are major employers, helping to retain lifelong residents and attract new ones. More than a third of the employees in the groups included in the analysis were between 20 and 40 years old. The regional economic output of nonprofits exceeds $422 million. These are among the many reasons why Adirondack Foundation, your community foundation, committed to enhancing the lives of people in the Adirondacks through philanthropy, is honored to support the Adirondack Nonprofit Network today and every day. I'm so grateful to ANCA for bringing in such knowledgeable speaker on rural economic issues. For more information on ANN, or our sort of loving pet name for the nonprofit network, give us a call. And if you're a vital part of this sector and not a part yet of ANN, let us know. We'd love to have you join us. So I'll give it back to Kate, and thank you.
We are so happy that you're here, all the way from Virginia, to share some of your stories and case studies and inspire us. So how did we run into Anthony? About a year and a half ago, one of our staff members was reading Yes Magazine, which calls itself Journalism for People Building a Better World. And your name, Anthony's name, showed up in there in a review of the book. So I looked at that book and I went, oh, this has got to be great for the work that we're trying to do. And of course, I went on Amazon and ordered the book, and I'm sorry I did that. I was back in, just operating on normal, I need a book, etc. So I read the book. So here it is. And my book is totally dog-eared and has notes and highlights and everything in it. It's beat up. It's beat up because I read it all the time. I use it as a reference manual. So anyway, I thought our board needed copies of this. And I started to open up Amazon.com and I went, whoa, whoa, whoa. Wait a minute. I just read Anthony's book. No. So I called up our friends at Bookstore Plus, who are, by the way, selling copies of Anthony's book out there if you need it, and I think you do need it. And they were able to get us 35 copies just as soon as Amazon could get them, and at a better price. So, I never look back, and I really try to avoid using systems that are basically destroying local economies as we know them. So, anyway, it also made me feel good to know that a percentage of the money that we were spending on these books was staying in the local community and not going into just the richest man on the planet's pocket. He doesn't need my money. But in this world where it feels increasingly chaotic and hopeless, climate change, inequality, division, and hate, Anthony's message is hopeful. That we can take back some autonomy and build economies that work for more people and rather than the few, that protect community and build community, that protect the environment. And that is kind of where I get my hope when I really get despairing when I'm watching the national news. So Anthony, he's received a number of awards and honors for his work, including Ford Foundation Leadership for Changing World Award, a selection by the Blue Ridge magazine as one of Central Appalachia's most important agents for positive change. He was a Kellogg National Food and Society Policy Fellow and a Fellow with the Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, which many of you know about. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Agriculture and Environmental Science from the University of Kentucky and a Master's in Economic and Social Development from the University of Pittsburgh. And he's married with 3 grown and apparently terrific children, one of whom knows one of our staff members, which is how we got your email address. So I compared to based on our staff members that your son's got to be great. So on that note, Anthony, over to you.
Can I do it from down here, or do I need to go upstairs? That's good. That's cool. Great. Thank you, Kate. That was lovely. And regarding Amazon, repentance is always in fashion. So good for you for recognizing the error of your ways and supporting your local bookstore. I'll say it's interesting because I passed the bookstore on the way through town coming over here. And the one place I stopped, I left the house at 4 o'clock this morning to catch my flight, so I was a little bit saggy when I pulled into town. The place I stopped to get a cup of coffee was Vinegar and Bliss, who's now catering this right here. So cool. And I'll just say too that it's just a few minutes of being around here, catching the last 30 minutes of the ownership transition conversation that was happening, led by Rob Brown and Martino and others. Is I walk away from events like this thinking, I shouldn't be talking to you all. I need you to come down and talk to us in Southwest Virginia and Central Appalachia. You guys really have a lot going on these days. But I'll jump in. This is a little bit of a kind of a blitzkrieg of slides. I move through them quickly, and then hopefully we'll have lots of really good conversation. My perspective is always, because when you talk to people, it's a privilege. You have a chance to influence people. So I think it's important to know who you're talking to. First and foremost, I'm a farmer. I was I was picking broccoli and cauliflower and trying to get tomatoes tied, late yesterday evening before hitting the ground to come here. In addition to my farm, I have a sustainable economic consulting business called Scale Inc., which brings me here, and of course I have this little book as well. So it's good to know where your speaker is coming from, so you know the kind of the background for their comments. You can take it with a grain of salt. Nevertheless, to quote a letter writer in our local paper, this just is my opinion, but it is the word of God. This is what somebody wrote after a lengthy rant in the Bristol Herald Courier. This was their final sentence. So I like that. It's my opinion, but it is the word of God. So let's start with this. What's wrong with what we've got? Because there's certainly a lot of good going on, but at the larger level, we've got some serious problems. And so I want to begin here. These next two graphs look at two things. This is the change in the population, the total population of the United States from 1980, the year Ronald Reagan was elected to his first term, until basically the present, from 230 million to 320 million people. During that exact same period of time, that's the change in the size of the US economy, adjusted for inflation. If it wasn't adjusted for inflation, those bars would be far more distant. Look at that again. Modest growth, about 42% more people, and yet the economy grew by almost threefold. Now that means, when we say the size of the economy, adjusted for inflation, grew by almost threefold, that means 3 times as much business activity, 3 times as many transactions, 3 times as much production and consumption of goods and services, 3 times as much cash moving through the economy in one form or another. So the big question is, why aren't most of us better off? 40 years later, the growth of the economy has dramatically outpaced the growth of the population, but the vast majority of Americans are treading water if they're not falling backwards. Well, how did that happen? There's a lot of reasons. This one's a little blurry, but there's 2 lines at the bottom. The greenish lines look at household income and also wages. The purple line is productivity. Now, historically, when productivity increased, of course, the owners, if they weren't worker owners, the capitalists, they kept some of that profit, but also a good chunk of that increase in productivity went to higher wages. Because if I can do today twice as much as what you did yesterday, I should get some of that. But starting around that same period of time, the late 70s and early 80s, that relationship was severed. So workers became more and more and more productive across almost every sector, but they didn't get the benefit of that increased money. Because that big space there between worker productivity and wages, somebody's keeping that cash. Well, who is it? Well, we know who it is. It's a small group of folks at the top. We know how the economy has divvied up the resources, and it's true in our country, but it's true globally as well. So the first thing to recognize in this context of what's wrong with what we got is that trickle down don't. And that the whole notion to which not only Republicans but Democrats have been wed for 40 years, that economic growth is always the answer, is wrong. Economic growth is necessary, economic growth is a precondition, but economic growth simply does not equate with increased prosperity, let alone other things. And that trickle-down philosophy that's so deeply ingrained in our thinking, it's not only kind of the context for national policy, but it affects local policy too. In Bristol, I live in Adirondack, a town of 8,000, just south of us is the big town of Bristol, which about 20,000 people on the Virginia side and 20,000 on the Tennessee side. On the Virginia side, with great fanfare, the local leaders announced a deal to bring Cabela's to exit 5. That's 5 miles from the center of Bristol. $54 million got the Cabela's to set up shop 5 miles from town. Interestingly, that was in September of 2013, that the same big announcement on the front page of the paper that day about this $54 million deal to bring one chain store to the region. At the back of the front section, they also announced the winner of the entrepreneurship competition. I'm sure many of your small towns like us have these these business competitions, entrepreneurial competitions, great things. They described her business and they said what her award was going to be, $5,000. That's a 10,000-fold difference. Now, $54 million, let's call it 50 million, that's the equivalent of 500 businesses getting $100,000 in some combination of grants, loans, tax credits. That's a lot of money to spend on economic development for a little town, Southern Virginia. So that's one big problem, the reliance on growth as always the answer, not only the precondition, but basically the answer. And the problems. Here's another one. This is better for the economy as we now measure it than this. Okay, so in other words, smoking and eating a, what would you guess, maybe a 1 1/4 pound combination burger there is better for the economy as we measure it through the gross domestic product than this, because if you go outside and garden, you're going to contribute less to the GDP. If you eat a modest-sized portion, you're going to contribute less to the gross domestic product. The fact of the matter is that our predominant way of measuring economic well-being, gross domestic product, does not care whether the activity purchase, the product purchase, is good for you or bad for you, good for the environment or bad. In fact, it's worse than that. Smoking cigarettes is great for the economy because you contribute a little bit if you get hooked, a couple packs a day, 3 packs a day for your life. But where you really contribute is when you get emphysema, heart disease, cancer. Then you become a spectacular contributor to the economy. So we need new economic measurements, because right now our economic measurements look upon any transaction equally, and in fact externalize a lot of costs. So when we put pressure on farmers, grain farmers in the Midwest in particular, to produce incredibly cheap corn and soybeans, we get externalities, we get soil erosion and other problems that aren't measured in the actual cost of a bushel of corn or soybeans. In Central Appalachia, a big externality in the cost of our electricity is mountaintop removal, strip mining, where again, the companies internalize costs to the degree that the Office of Surface Mining forces them to clean up, but many times that doesn't happen. Those are all externalized costs. And when you externalize costs and when you separate the people consuming the product from the people producing it, as with our factory farming, you get a tremendous amount of problems, environmental, health, worker wages, ecological, because ultimately that estrangement is critical. We'll talk more about that. So we have these supersized lives powered by cheap food, cheap energy, free water for the most part. But it's really not free, because what we've seen over the last couple of generations is that while the costs of food for us in aggregate, now food is not cheap if you're a very low income person, if you're somebody struggling to get by, but as a body for Americans, food has decreased from almost 20% of our household budget to less than 10%, but we've traded that off for much, much more expensive health care. In part, not in total, because of how we eat. So here's my proposition to you, and this is, it doesn't track exactly with the book, but kind of reinforces it, if you've read it, you'll know, is that these 4 basic ideas, I think, can form the foundation of new economic thinking. Because I'm somebody who really believes that one of our other problems, I won't go into a lot here, is that we think of economic strategies over here, and we think of health strategies here, we think of human welfare, social welfare here, and we think of environmental here. If we have an economy that is kind of a collateral damage economy that creates problems for health, community, welfare, and the environment that we're constantly trying to mitigate and clean up, that's one way to go about business. What if we had an economy that Marjorie Kelly, who writes a lot about worker ownership, says in its normal functioning, provided for people, allowed for good livelihoods, and protected the environment? What if we did that? So how do we do that? So I'm going to say that we want to do these 4 things: building local capacity, overcoming estrangement, solving for pattern, and then lastly, thinking about how we create a language of action. So building local capacity has a whole lot of things, and again, I feel like this is so elementary for you all, you're deeply into it. But part of it, of course, is just enabling people to provide for themselves a little bit more. In a city like Detroit, that's been in economic decline for generation and a half, the community garden phenomenon has really taken off. And it's in small towns too. I'm sure you have community gardens around here. It's a simple, very concrete measure that does multiple good things at once, but fundamentally gets people providing for a little bit of their food. Of course, you guys have farmers markets around this region, as we do in our region, and farmers markets are just critically important because they create this venue for farmers and other vendors to meet their neighbors and make them their customers. And they build local capacity. It's a kind of act of independence compared to relying on Kroger and Walmart. The Hub on the Hill, which is a wonderful example of kind of a new version of community cannery. We used to have community canneries in every county in Southwest Virginia. I don't know if you had them commonly in the rural areas up here. You probably did, but they were not commercial. The people could take their garden bounty or their neighbor's garden bounty and put food up for the winter. That's a picture from the Castlewood Cannery in Russell County, Virginia. But the Hub on the Hill is something similar. Now putting a commercial spin on it, allowing people to add value to products that maybe would go to waste or otherwise not reach their full value. There's other ways to build local capacity. Will Allen, some of you I'm sure know of Will, with Growing Power, has pioneered these aquaponic systems that are incredibly productive on small bits of land, integrating the production of fish, using their wastewater, growing herbs, growing other things, worm composting, the whole things, and turning often abandoned lots and other sort of unproductive things into highly productive and resilient areas. Many parts of the country, of course, for the last 20 plus years have been engaged in building a local food system. And farmers markets are the face of that. It's still a very important part, but there's now a movement beyond that. We started a food hub in Southwest Virginia called Appalachian Harvest almost 20 years ago. In New Mexico, a group called La Montanita started out as a group of folks meeting once a month to buy cheese and herbs and bulk grains in somebody's basement. They've grown now to be a consumer co-op that is buying from over 400 farmers in New Mexico, has grown both the market and the capacity so that they get to build their own warehouse. And they're supplying 6 retail outlets, that is La Montanita, as well as other regional grocers. Quite amazing. It's an example of building capital. You know here with your forests and your agricultural land, but fundamentally there's an exciting recognition that's beginning to emerge about how foundational the environment is as capital. Again, we've had this idea that you do economy and business development over here, and then when things get really bad, you clean them up and you try to restore the environment. What about if we view soil as the most fundamental form of capital? And if we did, we wouldn't depreciate it so willy-nilly, because well-managed soil not only makes a farm or a ranch or a piece of forest land more productive, it also sequesters carbon from the atmosphere. It also cleanses the air and the water. So it's absolutely essential. Moving on to the food sector, we have this movement towards solar gardens and community-owned solar. Such a critical part of local capacity. The growth in the solar industry has been remarkable. Incredible advances in technology, the amount of megawatts increasing all across the country. It's all great, but there's some real obstacles. And one of them is the fact that if solar is only the domain of people who can afford to put an array on the roof of their building or their home, it still will grow. But what we really need is this approach to clean energy collective, in which you can actually buy into community solar with whatever capacity you have. When they do this, you might get some people who are buying the equivalent of all the electricity they use, and you may get some folks who are renters, and they're just buying the equivalent of 10 or 20% of their electricity. But that's okay, because they're doing it as a community and reducing their dependence on fossil fuels, increasing their local resilience. Again, nothing to tell you all about worker ownership, because we just came from a session going into great detail about that. But in this country, we have credit unions, a lot of credit unions, and we have a pretty good sector of consumer co-ops. But we've really been lacking when you look at places like Spain and Italy and others, some of the Scandinavian countries, in worker ownership. So we're now at a moment when people are really starting to move towards worker ownership, legislation to enhance that, and that's really great. It's essential that we do this. When I first went to Southwest Virginia in the mid-'80s, I worked with 2 worker-owned businesses. One was a restaurant bakery and one was a sewing company. They were both kind of in decline by the time I got there. We couldn't stop that decline. But part of the issue was that nobody in the economic development infrastructure, nobody knew anything about worker co-ops and could help. They were basically relying on a Catholic priest who had been to Montracon. So we need to not only support worker co-ops, we need to build the support infrastructure, just like cooperative extension. 25 or 30 years ago in most of the country, I hope I won't piss anybody off, but really knew nothing about organic and sustainable farming and management intensive grazing and all of that. But now they do, at least in a lot of places, their knowledge base is growing. Our whole economic support system, the chambers, the SBDCs and everything else, need that same capacity to help. A couple of other examples of this idea of building local capacity and resilience, really interesting. From one of Marjorie Kelly's book, this amazing example. In New Hampshire, there was a trailer park that folks owned their trailers on the land that they were sitting on. And the guy who owned the land thought, I'm going to sell this because things are starting to happen around here, and I'm going to make money for a developer. So he was ready to sell the land from under him, and all those folks were going to be out. The New Hampshire Community Loan Fund stepped in, put together a loan package that helped them buy that land collectively and get some working capital to make improvements, put on porches, and all that sort of thing. That was so successful that they now have a whole loan portfolio dedicated just to manufactured housing. So again, think about that, what a difference that is in securing and stabilizing a local community, right? Now the second point, overcoming strangers. So Maggie Thatcher, some of you might be Maggie Thatcher fans, but she had this infamous statement about how there's no such thing as society. It's just individuals and families. And the idea was kind of the antithesis of we are our brothers and sisters keepers. It's like every man and woman for themselves. But fundamentally, we have to overcome this estrangement. So how do we do that? If we don't know where the means of our lives come from, whether it's food, fiber, energy, how do we overcome it? Well, again, farmers market's great. This is our little market in Abingdon, Virginia, town of 8,000. Started in a parking lot with 6 of us, grew to a better parking lot with about a dozen of us. And then about 10 years ago, it was happening so much that the town said, you guys need a permanent home. So they built this little pavilion. It's about 50 vendors on Saturday morning, about 40 on Tuesday afternoon. And we get between 1,500 and 2,000 customers on Saturday morning. That's for a town of 8,000 people. That's where we sell good farm stuff. So you have a lot of things happening there. You have opportunities for some like real business. But you also, we found that it's been a real incubator. I don't know if the farmers markets up here, they probably have had similar experiences. Because people, Cornell did a study about this. You can try a business out, most businesses at a farmer's market for very little cost. It's a great sort of low risk way to dip your toes in the business world. This woman, Nicole Dyer, did that with a couple of other folks. She started making these high energy organic juices, and she started making these little breakfast sandwiches at the Saturday morning market. The buns were bought from the local bakery, the pork came from one of the local pork producers, the eggs, the veggies, it was 100% local, and she had huge lines. So after about 3 years of nurturing the business, getting the recipes right and building the customer base, she went out on her own, and now White Birch Juice and Cafe is an incredibly successful business in Abingdon. It was incubated in the farmers market. Similarly, Steve and Becky Wolf had been selling at the market. They were organic producers. Not all of our farms are by any means, but a bunch are. And what they found was every time they needed a pest control or a disease management or organic feed for livestock or anything else, they were going to California. They were having to ship it in. So they said, well, what the heck? There's quite a few organic producers in this part of the world. Let's start our own business. So they did, Wolf Natural Elements. And now, so again, we have incubated in the farmers market a business that is helping the whole community. In Huntington, West Virginia, they took an abandoned building and turned it into the Wild Ramp, or as we say in Appalachia, ramp, the Wild Ramp grocery store. And the Wild Ramp grocery store took a problem, people being separated from access to food, basically a food desert in Huntington, and now they're selling for about 90 to 100 local farms products, meats, eggs, dairy, cheese, and produce in what was an abandoned building. Quite a success. Beyond food again with farmers. So Central Appalachia, much like the Adirondacks, is primarily forest, 65, 68% in forest, and it's some of the best hardwood forests in the world. Historically, what happens is the forests get clear-cut or high-graded, the logs go on trains and trucks, get shipped out, a tiny bit of the economic value of the wood stays locally. All the damage is indeed local. So we started a vertically integrated wood business. We gave loggers incentives to follow very sustainable forest management practices, paid them 20 to 30% more for every log they brought out, saw them into boards, kiln dried them, and manufactured hardwood flooring. That's a picture of some hickory hardwood flooring in the Bristol Public Library. So again, looking at that and saying, you know, we are very familiar with farm to table. What about forest to table? Forest to floor. And that was the concept there, connecting people to where their wood came. It was amazing to me when we were doing this, how many people were avid local food shoppers, but when it came time to put in flooring or trim or something else, where did they go? Home Depot, Lowe's, buy it wherever, you know. So this was an opportunity to help them connect and overcome that estrangement. Beyond the direct economic sphere, you have people using community theater, like in Colquitt, Georgia, Harlan, Kentucky, and other places. And I imagine at this Placid Arts Center as well. Not just to entertain, but to reignite a conversation about the community. That's what they did in Colquitt, Georgia, a southern town that's roughly equally black and white, that had a history of racial issues, and they engaged with the community, where the members of the community helped to write the plays, helped to act them out, just as they do with Higher Ground in Harlan, Kentucky, taking the difficult issues of the community, not employing, but engaging residents of the community and turning it into theater that has an impact. The other way we overcome estrangement is with public places. The book that I wrote, I had the great pleasure of spending 3 months in Sicily, which is where my father's people were from, in Ragusa, in southeastern Sicily. I had a contract with the publisher to write the book, and halfway through the year, I hadn't even gotten in halfway through the introduction. So I said to my wife, Lori, I can't do it, we gotta get out of here. So we went via Airbnb, we stayed in Sicily, I wrote the book. Well, in Europe, in Sicily, Spain, and other places, the public spaces are still incredibly alive. It was amazing to us in these little towns, in Syracuse and Ragusa and whatnot, that at 8, 9 o'clock, the squares, the piazzas would fill up. And even young people would put their phones in their pockets for the most part. And street theater, music, and food, and everything else just happens. We don't have that culture really much in the US, but we're trying to create farmers markets are one of those civic places. Vibrant downtowns, like Placid, are another version of it. And so too are places like Congress Square Park in Maine, which was a derelict area that the town was getting ready to sell to a developer to build expensive high rises or something like this. And the citizens occupied the space. They started bringing chairs and tables and cards and games. They got Wi-Fi donated. They started watching the World Cup and other stuff. They just literally occupied the space with help from an organization using a strategy called lighter, quicker, cheaper, to say, we still see this as a public space. This is our space. You can't sell it off to the highest bidder. And then by the time it came finally for a vote of the town council 2 years later, they had re-energized Congress Square Park so much that the town voted not to sell it to a developer. In fact, passed a law that said any publicly owned squares and spaces, parks, etc., would have to have a vote of 7 out of 8 members of the elected board before they could sell it to a private developer. So again, re-energizing those public spaces. Third or fourth, solving for patterns. So you know this guy, Wendell Berry. I love Wendell. He's my mentor, guru. I've had the great opportunity of being to his farm and spending some time with him on a number of occasions. And long ago, good 35 years ago, in one of his book of essays, he talked about solving for pattern. And this is, I think, such a great idea. Think about that, solving for pattern. So what is solving for pattern not? Well, it's a lot of things that it's not. Spending $54 million to bring a chain store to your community when you're strapped for cash, that's not solving for pattern. Here's a great example. So big grain farmers, they have wheat problems. I'm a small produce guy. I got wheat problems. I know weeds are expensive. But the solution for the corn farmers, of course, has been, I'm sorry for blurring these on the screen, has been the development of plants, corn plants, soybean, cotton, et cetera, that can tolerate herbicide. So Roundup Ready, corn, soybean, et cetera. And at first it seemed to work great. I could spray the fire out of it for as long as needed. And it allowed them to control the weeds without tillage and less time. But of course, what happened, as was predicted, was a tremendous increase in the rapidity of those weeds developing resistance to Roundup. So now, throughout the Midwest and the Deep South, you have the majority of farms have these super weeds that glyphosate does not kill, that Roundup does not kill. They had a problem, which was managing weeds in the system. And their solution to it was to hammer the weeds, but what that did was create more weeds that were more resistant. So now, Monsanto and others are introducing the next generation of genetically modified weed resistant, where they tolerate not only glyphosate or Roundup, but to 2,4-D and other even more toxic herbicides. Here's the deal. Researchers in Iowa and other places and farmers found that simply by introducing a third grain into that corn-soybean rotation, something like wheat or millet, or whatever it needs to be depending on your particular area, dramatically reduced weed pressures. Dramatically. When they did these field studies with introducing a small grain into that rotation, weed pressure dropped by about 85%, herbicide use by a comparable amount. Not only that, they interrupted the life cycle of the corn rootworm, which was a real problem for corn growers as well, that required additional sprays, and they all but eliminated the corn rootworm. That's solving the pattern. That's understanding the relationships on your farm and using those relationships to your advantage. Bren Smith, fabulous guy, who grew up, quit high school, went commercial fishing at the age of 15, and saw how the fisheries were being depleted up and down not only the east coast of the US, but the west coast of Canada. Bren, over the years, in his own smarts and resourcefulness, created a system he calls vertical ocean farming. And he raises shellfish, he raises oysters and clams and scallops, mussels. And he does it integrated with a couple of different varieties of seagrass and seaweed. And the system is remarkable. The seaweed helps clean up the local ecosystem so that these clams and oysters get a premium price when he sells them because they're from such clean water. And at the same time, it sequesters remarkable amounts of carbon, pulls it out of the atmosphere, much more so than forests and agricultural lands can do. So Bren created the system based on the patterns in the marine ecosystem that's producing 4 species of very marketable, healthy foods, while also contributing to climate balance and cleaning up the marine ecosystem. That's being accomplished. Another example of solving for pattern, I'm wondering if you all have some of these going on here. A group in Eastern Kentucky started their pharmacy program, where doctors and healthcare professionals are now writing prescriptions for local produce that are redeemable at local farmers markets or at local farm stands. Again, rather than looking at the one problem, farmers need markets, it's hard for farmers to find markets for their products. And then another problem, people aren't eating very well. Oftentimes, even more so, people in lower income, people stretching the budget. So how do we solve this problem? They put the two together. And by writing these prescriptions, they're finding that not only will people redeem them and use that produce, but it's beginning to change eating habits. It's beginning, more so than just simply putting a food outlet in the community, actually putting the money in the form of the prescription in the hands of people. And I think this is maybe the last example from this. On-bill financing, what some folks in southeastern Kentucky did, Mason. They again had a problem. One problem was low-income and working people in trailers and old drafty houses couldn't afford to heat their homes, spending $300-400 a month. But they also couldn't afford to do the really full thermal envelope changes to bring that cost down. So they stepped in, they worked with the local rural electric cooperative, and they created this program. So now people get these major renovations done to the house, windows, the whole thing. And they pay back for those things through the savings on their electric bill. So if their bill dropped from an average of $300 a month to $100 a month, they're using most of that savings to repay the cost, and they're getting to keep a little bit as well. Everybody wins, fewer emissions, less energy use, more valuable, warmer, more comfortable home. And also, I don't know if you all are into participatory budgeting. I'm not going to talk much about it here, but something that I just learned about in the research for the book that I think is a terrific model of solving for pattern, because it's dealing with one of our biggest problems right now, a problem of estrangement again, which is how citizens, for the most part, feel so alienated from the government, which has created all kinds of situations that we're in. And participatory budgeting puts people back into the public in a meaningful way, where they actually get to decide how money is used in their community. Small part of their community's budget, but it's big in New York City. I don't know if it's still up here. We can talk more about it. And the last thing is this idea of using the language of action rather than abstraction. I think I don't think you have that problem with ANCA and the organizations up here, but I often find that in the nonprofit world, there's a lot of words used. People just talk so much, and I've been in so many meetings over the years where I think, Lord, I don't know a farmer back home who could stand this. They'd be running from the room at this point. So we tend to talk big, we talk abstract, we're lofty in our language oftentimes. And I think we're hurt by that. What if we use the language of action? So in Southern West Virginia, Coalfield Development Corporation, a nonprofit, was dealing with the nosedive that coal mining was in for many years. And they set up a really integrated training program that took laid-off miners and others, put them through a 6-month on-the-job training that included 33 hours a week of actually working in the business and 6 hours of classroom. And so far, about 6 years in, they have a 100% employment rate of people going through their program. And it's because they actually work with existing businesses in solar energy and construction and deconstruction and material salvage and other things for living wage jobs. What I want to say about this is not only are they a successful training program, but they've used that very innovative and successful experience to help begin to shape the policies of the Appalachian Regional Commission and of the state of West Virginia. Using the language action, we also did this picture. I love this picture because this fellow, John Mullins, was one of our first first tobacco farmers to join the food hub that I launched, that we launched back in 1999. This picture was taken about 2001 or so. That's our grand Appalachian harvest. And so it's one thing when your usual suspect hippie farmers are doing organic. To the legislators in Southwest Virginia, those people like me, but others were just like too weird. But when John Mullins is standing at the loading dock, proudly holding some of his organic tomatoes while smoking a cigarette, that speaks volumes to some of those old boys from the state legislature and the state tobacco commission. So getting people that they could relate to and saying, hey, this isn't just wishful thinking, this is working. I've transitioned from tobacco to raising 12 acres of organic tomatoes and other products, and it's working. The language of action with push buffalo. How many folks are familiar with push buffalo? If you read the book, you know about it. Again, it's a very interesting story. Set up shop in, I think, the west side of Buffalo, one of the poorest communities in Buffalo. And they've done remarkable things with, again, integrating worker training with the needs of the community, from housing rehab to parks and urban farms to ecological restoration, all kinds of things, just amazing. But what they also did was they were perplexed about why was it that so many properties in their neighborhood were sitting vacant for years and nothing ever seemed to happen. Nobody could seem to access them. And it turns out, when they did the research, that the New York State Housing Finance Agency was holding those properties and had bundled them, I think through Bear Stearns or somebody like that on Wall Street, to get a financial flow. So the State Housing Finance Agency was using poor and dilapidated homes and properties in poor neighborhoods to generate income for the State Housing Finance Agency. When Push Buffalo, which was working on restoring those properties and had action on the ground, found that out and went public with it, money started to flow and things started to change. So 2 final thoughts. We're in an, interesting is a graceful word, interesting period in our culture and political history right now. One of the big divides that is separated. It's around the environment and environmental regulation. You all know that. And I found that in my own political campaigns and elsewhere. And we can talk about the narrative that says business is more important than the environment and all of that. But really, from our side, I think people, or I should say from my side, people who are about conservation and environmental protection have too often forgot that in rural communities, the environmental question, the conservation question, is a little bit different than it is in suburban communities. Because most of the folks that I know who are environmentalists are town folks, they're city folks. And they view the environment from the lens as something that's beautiful, that they recreate in, that they bike in, that they hike in, that they want to sustain, and all of that is worthy. But it's not for them fundamentally about their livelihood. If you listen to the most ardent environmentalists, most of them have never cut a tree with a chainsaw, cut up logs for firewood. It's just a different view. So I think if we want to begin to integrate different political ideas to be able to move forward economically, we need to recognize that one of these big polarizing issues in our nation around the environment and the question of regulation, we also need to see that in the country, the environment is still connected to livelihood. And the last thing, and I'll leave it with this, and we'll open it up to questions, is again, returning to that question about an economy that's based on endless growth, and the idea that if we allow a few people at the top the freedom to be the great figures that they are, that prosperity will trickle down to the rest of us. Well, that's wrong, we know that. But there's also the question is the wrong question. I've been in so many economic development meetings over the years, mostly in Virginia, but really all across the country, where the question was, what jobs? Where are the jobs going to come from? But the real question is, it really is, not where the jobs going to come from, but what is the work that needs to be done? And that's a different question in different places. Some of it's the same. There's work around being healthy and creating the opportunities for health, for healthy living, for healthy lifestyles. There's work about eating better. There's work in Appalachia about restoring old strip mine land, and in other places about reforesting. But whatever it is, there's tons of work to be done. So let's make that our driving question that guides our economic strategy. What is the work we need to do? And then let's figure out the combination of private sector, cooperatively owned, nonprofit social enterprise, and government entities that fulfill that work, that create those businesses, that do the things that make people healthier, that make their communities whole. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Moderate this session. Thank you, Jim.
So Anthony has time for some questions here. Does anyone have any questions? Just raise your hand. I'll run over with the microphone to you. If you could just say your name and maybe what you do.
My name is Chris Mayer. I'm the executive director for Champlain Area Trails, make hiking trails, and save land in the Champlain Valley. My question is, the universities seem to be the educators for so many of the farmers, except for the real farmers that actually grow food to eat, you might say vegetables and stuff. But I mean, that's sort of a slight comment. But they seem to be educating for industrial farming. And so, what are strategies to turn around our educational systems so that they're educating farmers to grow food rather than to spray chemicals?
Yeah, so from my point of view, it's a couple of things to get there. And for sure, the main universities that I have worked with on an ongoing way, Virginia Tech, Virginia State, which is in Petersburg, Virginia, UT, University of Tennessee, and occasionally Kentucky State. They're all land grants, all very traditional, all into tobacco. And tobacco kind of paid the bills for a long, long time. What we started doing early on was we started getting, first of all, we found open-minded, different thinking out of the box, if you want to say, thinking professors in entomology, in agronomy, in crop science, in livestock. There's always some progressive people, even if the institution as a whole is not. And we started working relationships with them. And then we convinced them to do some field trials. So like we did some field trials on beneficial insect habitat on my farm and others, where you create little plots of dill and yarrow and cilantro and buckwheat and other things to attract beneficial insects that help you control. We did things on biochar and on building soil organic matter. So we started using the language of action by finding things that were quite practical, that would be useful to farmers in the short run if they succeeded. And we found a professor or two, along with an extension agent or two, that was willing to do it with us, even if they weren't that knowledgeable or that excited about it. And that led to more and more of that kind of thing. And as the results came in, it started to percolate up. Now, all of those universities, Virginia Tech and others, are still predominantly into big ag and all that means. But it's substantially different now, how much knowledge and understanding and interest they have in both sustainable farming methods, but also in local food system things now compared to 20 years ago. And I think at least part of it was using practical on-farm examples to get them thinking differently. I've found that, if you just say, if we'd gone to extension and the land grants and said, tobacco's killing people, it's terrible on the environment, it's destroying the soils, and it's killing people, we would have gotten nowhere. So we found practical things. That was one thing. Then we started also doing tours. And the tours, we brought university people and legislators to some of these farms, particularly farms like John Mullins, that were more traditional farmers, to see some of these practices in action. And that also helped. So it's kind of that bringing the mountain to Muhammad sort of thing, and also having a practical angle. I think, that's, I don't know, in this era of extreme climate change with a decade or two to significantly change the way we run the world, maybe that's not fast enough anymore, but that certainly has been an effective strategy to begin to change the universities a little bit.
Hi, I'm Frank Sotero from the Adirondack Small Business Development Center in Syracuse, New York. Just as a side note, I want to make sure that people are aware that Airbnb, the sort of community-owned alternative to Airbnb that you mentioned earlier, is doing a capital raising round right now online as a cooperative development, and they're actually working their platform cooperative development team out of Italy as well. So I've used Airbnb, I think many of us have, but now there's one of these cooperatively owned alternatives that's in development. My question for you is, you did mention the SBDC earlier, and coming from that network, wondering if you could expand at all on what you see as these economic development agencies, both citywide, statewide, et cetera, what they really need to do at this point in time to get into this lane.
Yeah, I think you probably know more about that. And by the way, thanks for bringing up that Airbnb. That's great. I've been a little bit like Kate and Amazon ever since my glorious 3 months in Sicily. It's been like, but Airbnb sucks. I feel so bad. Don't save so much money. So I'm glad to know about Airbnb. I'll check that out. So I'd love to have that conversation with you. The SBDCs, I don't know of one in Appalachia, maybe there is, that would have been spending a day as a resource person in a workshop on transition to worker ownership. That's remarkable. To me, so I think one thing is worker ownership. I don't know if you're familiar with some of you, I'm sure Phil Gates gone into some detail about the lack of that expertise within small business centers and other economic development things. So that's a critical thing. And I think using the analogy of how extension has not totally, but significantly shifted its approach to sustainable agriculture. Second thing is just, we need to build on the fact that most small towns and rural areas now, most, have at least begun to recognize that the subsidy game is, at best, a sort of a wash, and oftentimes they're not even that. So even as the economic development leaders, the elected officials, and oftentimes the people in the agencies are still giving out these subsidies over $1 billion a year, there is this sense of remorse, of being trapped, of not having an alternative. So that opens the door. And SBDC, along with the CDFIs and the other kind of folks at the front end of new economic thinking in local communities, should be stepping into that sense that we got to stop just giving a lot of money to the big corporations because they're playing us against each other. People know that. And I think that what they need to do is they need to look at Bali type networks. How do we not only support individual businesses, whether privately owned or worker owned, but how do we create really practical and vibrant local business networks where they support each other, where businesses buy from each other, where businesses turn to each other for the services and the products and the goods that they need, where they work together to promote not just local buying, but policy changes, to level the playing field between small independents and big chains. There's a ton of work to be done. But not that many communities, even communities that have begun to see revitalization of their downtowns, not many of them have taken that next step of the real local business alliances, whatever they might call it. And I think the SBDCs, in my experience, have tended to focus on the individual business person or aspiring entrepreneur, and that's fine. But why not also understand the potential for 2 dozen or 5 dozen or 100 businesses to work together to further everybody's market share and their overall prospects?
Hi, my name is Tracy Henderson. I'm the program director of the Essex Farm Institute. And I'm wondering if you can, you share a lot of really exciting and hopeful case studies. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit of the challenges that some of those case studies may have, and I imagine did face in the process of getting to the exciting ending. What were some of the main obstacles that you had that farmers went through to make transitions that the hubs you've worked with have gone through, that may be categorized as some of the general economic challenges that you saw in this process? Because I think here we see a lot of really hopeful stuff, but the question is how to sustain it. And if we can anticipate some of those challenges on a systematic level, maybe we can anticipate a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of those. And they aren't just challenges on the way to the successful end, they're sort of challenges in perpetuity. At least some of them are, you know. If you're a nonprofit kind of social enterprise type organization like Push Buffalo or Placid or Appalachian Sustainable Development that I started, it's a struggle forever because most nonprofits, let me say this, many entrepreneurial oriented nonprofits or social enterprises have kind of moved beyond the model of strictly getting donations, whether from foundations or donors, to fees for service or a business model that generates income, like our food hub generates income when I started Appalachian Harvest. When you move to that model as part of your income, the expectations from people who used to give you money shift. When you sort of find a more successful way to address the problem that's used in your market, and pretty quickly people are like, well, you're a business, why do you keep asking us for money? You should be making money now. So even as you kind of succeed, you still move into a new set of challenges. So that's one. So capital is always a challenge. Getting it at the beginning when it's a new idea is a challenge, but it's hard and ongoing. Another challenge is, again, typically, and I sense that it's less of an issue at this point now in your part of the world because of the work of ANCA and so many others, but it typically is that you're sort of a fish out of water. You're doing it on your own. I mean, when we started working with tobacco farmers and other traditional farmers to do organic and sustainable farming, there was just nothing available. This is 30 years ago from the land grants or extension or other experts in the field. We had to essentially create our own intellectual and extension capacity. So oftentimes, whether it's food and farming, whether it's what Brent Smith was doing, he's now got NOAA and all these other people working with him, but when he was going the first 10 years, he was on his own. That's often the case too, is there's not a supportive infrastructure, or at least it's hard to find the people that can really help you, that can plug some of your knowledge gaps or reinforce what you're saying. So you're simultaneously figuring it out and making the case while you're figuring it out with very little kind of collaboration from agencies. That's a very common problem. So to the degree that support organizations like ANCA intermediaries can help make that case, can help connect to university resources, to practitioners and others, that's what Bali does when it's at its best as well. A third thing is just larger cultural things. So much of what social entrepreneurs are facing is, it's the cheap food phenomenon writ large, not just for food. I mean, let's be honest. To oversimplify just a tad, the American dream for a long time has been to get to the point that the things that we all need to live are so cheap that we are freed up to spend much of our money on shit we don't need. Excuse me. That's kind of the American dream, right? That's consumerism. Is moving beyond the basics. So your food, your material use, fiber, whatever, your energy, that all becomes stuff. And again, of course, this is not true for millions of Americans, but that is kind of the dream. Get to the point with that. So that's deeply ingrained in us. I can't tell you how many times I've been in conversations where somebody would say, I think a progressive thinking person, I thought, would say, I like organic. I'm just waiting for it to get as cheap as the other food and then I'll buy it. It's like, dude, that's the problem. So it's not just true of food, it's true of alternative energy and other things. So solving the price issue is huge. Because the truth is, many of us in the local food world have tried to figure out how to make really healthy, nutrient-dense food that was raised with environmental restoration rather than environmental damage, affordable for everyday people. If not the poorest of the poor, at least for working folks. And it's no easy thing. At the farmer's market on Saturday morning, the biggest line is always at our booth first. And people think we're swimming in money because we're dishing out produce like mad for a little bit on Saturday morning. We're making just a little bit because we're trying to keep the prices reasonable and fair. So the price issue, which is a deep cultural issue for us, things of sustenance should be cheap. That's what we think. Now, the good news there is that there's plenty of people, still very much in the market, plenty of people who are turning that around, including working people, including moms with limited incomes and young kids, including seniors on limited incomes who are starting to say, this is the stuff that matters, and I'm going to spend my money. Most true of food, because food is kind of the entree to the alternative economy for a lot of people. It's the thing that's most intimate, that we're most intimate with. But it's beginning to happen in other places. And again, things like the Clean Energy Collective that allows people to buy into the solar energy economy without having to put a lot of money down, which they couldn't do if it was just on their own, are enablers to that. So that's another, but that's always right below the surface, is this question of price. And so the food hubs, I do a lot of feasibility studies, business planning and stuff for food hubs. And almost every time I see a request for a proposal, they'll say, we want to create a food hub that allows farmers to sell far more products at a good price, and we want to underserved people and tackle food deserts, and it's going to be sustainably raised, and we're going to circulate local dollars, and we're going to break even in 3 years. And I'm like, no, you're not. No, you're not. What you're talking about is the inverse of the normal system. The normal system is buy low and sell high, or at least much higher than you bought. Tyson Foods, just finishing up the meat racket, if you want an eye-opening book. Buy low, squeeze the farmers, or the foresters, the loggers, or the energy suppliers, everything you can, and then maximize your margin. That's the normal thing. The sustainable ag local food system has put that on its head. It's kind of buy high, sell low. What kind of a business proposition is that, right? And yet I can tell you that there's scores of communities around the country at this very moment who are sending out requests for consultants to tell them how to do that, and you can't. So, part of it is at the local enterprise level to recognize that. So then that leads to other interesting things, which we can go into more detail another time, but it's like, for instance, at farmers markets, one of the ways people grapple with it is the advent of EBT and snack cards at farmers markets. That was a way, and along with that, with Gus Schumacher and others, the development of matching money, the double bucks type things. I'm sure your markets have. We were the first market in Southwest Virginia had those. Hundreds of markets have them. So that's a way that a farmer can still sell his broccoli or his tomatoes, whatever, at pretty good margin over here, but he can sell to a lower income consumer, a person temporarily with lower income, without taking a big hit, right? We did another thing. I think I described it in the book. We had, when we started selling to supermarkets, unfortunately, they have the industrial kind of concept of food, same size, same shape, same color, perfect. And so in the first year or two, we were throwing away literally tons of absolutely great local organic produce because we couldn't sell it to the supermarkets and meet their standard. So we started selling some of it to their in-store food bars. That was one we did. We sold the seconds at a discount price. That helped. And then we started this thing called Healthy Families, Family Farms, in which we got donations from churches, mostly, but also civic clubs and individuals. And they used 100% of the donations to buy the seconds directly from the farmers and then donate them to the regional food bank. So different ways that makes good, healthy food, and I can imagine similar scenarios with energy. The NACID on-bill financing is a similar approach with energy. How can a lower income and working family access energy conservation? Right now, in the Green New Deal debate, some folks are saying that the effort, the notion that we should have a national campaign to make people's homes and buildings energy efficient is elitist. There's a lot of people out there saying that, particularly on the right, but that's an elitist thing. That poor families and working folks, they can't afford that. That's a rich person's thing. What an absurd notion that people with the least money shouldn't also deserve to be able to have a home or a building that isn't leaking energy. So that on-bill financing is a way to create access for people that otherwise could not afford to weatherize their home. So we are grappling with those questions, which is good. You know, we're moving beyond the kind of elite model.
Hey everyone, my name is Shane. I own D&D Meats and Jesus Girl Smokehouse. I've been in business 40 years. So we've been through everything, thick and thin, Walmarts, dollar stores, every 10 feet from our store. We have check 4 every 5 miles around us. So we've always have been innovative with how we survive.
Excuse me, do you have a retail storefront? Is that-
We have a retail storefront.
Okay.
Been on 40 years. But you know, we hit all the bumps along the way, but we survived. So we're always thinking outside the box. However, there's always things that, you know, baffle my mind because we do have meat processing facility, so we process about 200,000 pounds of meat. But we get these farmers that come in and, you know, we're 75 cents a pound. They're selling grass-fed beef for $9 a pound, but they're balking that. We're charged 75 cents. I just shake my head because I got the workman's comp, $2 million worth of equipment, and we're hustling. I mean, we're really working, and we got a building that's getting taxed to death. And then, but they don't want to pay 75 cents a pound, but they want to charge you $9 a pound at farmers market. So I'm just baffled because if they lowered the price, and it's the same as a big factory farmer was charging, they push more sales out in the local economy. And the other thing is like New York State's behind the ball that we don't have our own state facilities instead of USDA. There's only a few USDA facilities, you know, across the state. We do like USDA products, but not full slaughter. So I just kind of get baffled on that. Then I got this cheese farmer because we do go to the farmers market. And they're selling their cheese for $13.99 a pound. And I look up, they got a Vistaprint sign. But they're not buying, they got a Vistaprint sign, but they're not buying it from a local sign maker. Or it happens all the time because we've been going to farmers markets forever. We used to do 40, 50 events. So I've seen it all. And I just, at the same time, the farmers want this and they want the grants, but so they give them the grants and then they're paying you in cucumbers and not putting someone on that tax roll. Like we are hiring people. 20, 30 employees. So I think they work against themselves sometimes as well, but then they want the help on this side, and I'm kind of baffled.
Well, we used to, until about 15, 20 years ago, most people thought farmers were sort of a dying breed. They were people who couldn't make it in other things. That was the view. And now we're in a phase where farmers, at least local food farmers, are kind of romanticized and they're sort of up on a pedestal a little bit. doesn't change the fact that a lot of farmers are still very much tunnel vision. I mean, I think part of it is that farmers tend to view processors as just another middleman. Farmers have been getting screwed by the middleman, whether it's the Berry Cooperative or Walmart or whatever, for a long time. So there's a real built-in skepticism and negativity about this middleman. They're probably seeing it for that. It's not justified, but I mean, I don't know how you make that case, except without you and processors like you, what would they do? You know, you're a critical part of the infrastructure. Now, I know farmers that I work with where I'm from and other places that totally get that. And 75 cents a pound is a good deal. So, you know, what they need to be able to do is work out the math, and if paying that means they need to go from 9 to 9.25 or 9.50, then that's what they need to do. But you're essential, you're their access to the market, right?
Yeah,
And
we sell a lot of beef for local farmers that can't market like us, so if someone calls me and says, I want half, I go out and I go find a farmer I think that's raising good beef, and I was telling him selling beef to this farmer that last year sold one, so it's not like I'm just a processor.
right,
If they
right,
call me at midnight, 2 AM, I'm always there.
yeah,
You know, we're going down to shoot some bison. We went and got special license just to do it like that, but it's fact that, so this guy can now sell his own bison instead of going to Canada.
right.
And it took me a month of paperwork to do
Yeah.
it, so it's,
Yeah.
we do a lot for that 75 cents a pound.
Yeah, sounds like you're a marketer as well. I mean, again, it's just that a lot of folks have tunnel vision, the thing of not making the local sign. Again, the SBDC question. I mean, if you imagine that the farming community, food entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs generally did form some sort of a local business alliance and started finding out, hey, if I need website development, there's somebody local to do it. If I need a sign printed or brochures printed, if I need my meat processed, all that. It's remarkable how many people are so focused on their own local venture, but automatically go to the internet for the answer for everything else, you know, for the cheapest thing. And some people get it, but I'd say it's still not that many folks that recognize that, you know, somebody like you is a critical piece of their livelihood. That's what they gotta see. You just have to hang in there for another 40 years and then maybe you'll get it.
So my name is Jim Sonneborn, and I chair the ANCA board, and Kate's instructions were to thank everybody. I'll start, however, with Anthony. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for living in Virginia and supporting my alma mater. I attended the university and was there this weekend in Charlottesville, and it is an amazing place, as I'm sure you know. ANCA is a non-political organization. We really are. We're very, very careful about that. So I have to be very careful about how I say this. But Susan, I want you to know that Mr. Teddy Roosevelt, I believe, was in Saranac Lake, so your boss will not be the first president of the United States to have been here. And she has been here and talked about small businesses and helping small businesses, particularly rural businesses. I know a lot of people here, and I can single out lots of other people individually thank, but James, this facility is wonderful. We thank you. The Adirondack Foundation and are great organizations. I also think, you know, Kate thanks everybody, but she has just done a remarkable job of reinventing and reinvigorating ANCA, which first came to my attention through my friend Brian Reuter when he said, well, I'm thinking maybe I'm going to go on the board. What do you think? I was like, what is that? I've never even heard of it. When he was, of course, way ahead of me in such things. So I do thank everybody for coming, because the reason you're here is you're interested in this topic and in this community, and you're invested in the community. And I, as I said, could probably single out lots of individuals who I know. Probably there are lots of others of you that I don't know or just as involved. By the way, I should single out one other person, because from what I can gather from your background, Aaron Wolf was a Democratic candidate for Congress. I just thought I'd mention that in case you wanted to chat with him later. Small businessman, successful entrepreneur, great guy. You might have something in common if you wanted to talk with him. So
We'll get drunk together sometime.
yes. So I was told to tell you all that the lobby is over there, but you know that. The books are for sale in the lobby. I'm going to give you a quote from my grandfather, he gave me 50 years ago, that I keep thinking about and thinking about how it applies today, and it's complicated. He said, America was made great on a full garbage pail. It's a really interesting thing to think about as we look at our economy and our planet. And thank you again, and thank everybody for coming.